Hi guys, welcome to the last of our crash courses. This one is on the digestive system. So if we look big picture, what is the purpose of the digestive system? Well, we know that we are eating food and it's coming into our digestive system. And the main purpose is for us to be able to get the nutrients out of that food so that we can pass it to our circulatory system, which can then bring it to all the cells in our body that need the nutrients. Along that process, there will be waste produced because not everything in food becomes nutrients that we can use, so we do need to get rid of the waste. And then we see this term nutrients. You guys are familiar with it, but just so we look at a bit of a definition. So nutrients, when we talk about nutrients, they are the chemicals that must be obtained by an organism from its environment in order for it to survive. And when we say from its environment, we mean from food. So there's four major functions of the digestive system. The first one is ingestion. So that's actually taking food into our body. Next is digestion, which is the breaking down of that food. The next one is absorption. So we're absorbing the nutrients from the food. And last but not least, excretion, which means we're excreting the waste. Now, the major component of the digestive system in complex organisms is called the gastrointestinal tract, or GI tract for short. So this is the passageway that extends from the mouth to the anus in which all four major functions take place. So we're having ingestion, digestion, absorption, and excretion all happen within the GI tract. And you can think about it as the passageway where food actually travels through. So let's look at the major organs that make up the GI tract. The first one is the mouth. So we are mechanically breaking down food in the mouth using our teeth and tongue, and we are chemically breaking down food using saliva. So mechanically, meaning that we're actually physically mashing up our food when we chew, and then there's chemicals in saliva that also help us break down food as well. This word we're familiar with from talking about the respiratory system. The epiglottis is that flap of flesh that covers the trachea as you swallow. This is super important. If you've ever swallowed anything down the wrong tube, it's not a comfortable feeling, so we really depend on this epiglottis to keep our trachea covered so that the food is going down the right tube. And speaking of the right tube, the esophagus is that tube that transports food from the mouth to the stomach. Now, this long tube here is lined with smooth muscles, and these smooth muscles are able to move the food down the esophagus using a process called peristalsis. So I want to just stop there and look at what peristalsis actually is. So here's kind of an image of what the inside of your esophagus looks like. And all along here, there's these smooth muscles that contract like a wave. So it looks like they're doing the wave, and it's able to push food down the right way by doing these wave-like contractions. So this happens, peristalsis happens in the esophagus. It also happens in our intestines. So let's take a look at what it looks like. So you can see it kind of looks like it's doing the wave there. So this is an example showing the large intestine, but the same thing happens in the esophagus. So picture there's muscles on the outside, they're squeezing, causing those waves to go through. And you can see it's able to push the food along because of it. Okay. So another way to think about this is if, say, you had a tennis ball and you were trying to put it down in arm sleeve of your shirt, you'd have to like squeeze around behind the tennis ball to move it down. So that's exactly what those smooth muscles are doing. And those contractions are so strong that we're actually able to eat upside down. Even if you eat upside down, those muscles will push the food against gravity in the right direction. Okay, so next up is the stomach. So at the end of our esophagus, we have entered now the stomach. And the stomach is a J-shaped muscular sac that's filled with acid. In the stomach, we are churning food to break it down further, meaning we're kind of squishing and mashing it in the stomach further. And in the stomach, there are enzymes that help us to break down food. So just like the mouth, we have both mechanical and chemical digestion happening in the stomach. Now there's two openings to the stomach. We have one where the esophagus meets the stomach, and the other where the stomach turns into the intestines. And these aren't just open holes all the time. We actually have circular muscles at each opening that allow food in and out at the right time. So that first opening is called the gastroesophageal sphincter, and that is where the esophagus meets the stomach. So you can kind of think about the name gastroesophageal, that looks like esophagus. So that is where the stomach meets the esophagus. The next one is called the pyloric sphincter, and that is where the stomach meets the small intestine. We have 4 different layers of the stomach. So the innermost layer is called the mucosa, and it's extensively folded. So it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but there's lots of tiny little folds in there to increase surface area. And in this layer, we are secreting gastric juice. So that's kind of a combination of acid, digestive enzymes, and mucus to help us break down our food. The next layer is the submucosa. So that's the connective tissue layer where all the networks of nerves and blood vessels are. The next one out is the muscularis. So muscularis sounds like muscles, and that's exactly what it is. It consists of smooth muscles. And there's actually, you can see kind of in this image here, there's 3 different kinds of muscles that are in this layer, but we won't worry about that. You just need to know that there are smooth muscles in this layer. And then last but not least, the serosa layer, which is the outermost layer that holds the stomach in place. After the stomach, we have the small intestine. So this is a long, narrow, winding tube, and it's really long, but it's called the small intestine because of the diameter of the tube. So they're kind of skinny little tubes that wind around. So despite it being really long, it is called the small intestine because of that diameter. And this is where we are going to further digest food and absorb the nutrients. Put a little star beside that. This is where the absorption of nutrients happens. So we have 3 sections of our small intestine. The first one is the duodenum. And in this section, we have enzymes being secreted into the small intestine, and this is where digestion starts. The next up is the jejunum, and this is where digestion continues and some absorption will begin. And then the last layer is the ileum, and this is where a majority of the nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream via diffusion. So the inner layer of the small intestine contains many folds to be able to maximize the surface area for nutrient absorption. So these folds are called villi and microvilli. So villi are the small little projections, and you can kind of see them in this image here. So each of these small little finger-like projections are the villi, and then you can't see it, you'd have to zoom in closer. But on each of these, there's actually even more tiny little projections that come off of that, and that's the microvilli. So the purpose of these little folds, as you can see, they're red, so they've got all blood vessels that feed up through them. So it's giving the blood vessels more space to be able to absorb the nutrients into the bloodstream. Okay, so then we have our large intestine, and it's called the large intestine because, as you can see, the diameter of the tube is pretty thick, so it's a lot bigger than the small intestine. So the main purpose of the large intestine is to absorb water. So the small intestine was absorbing the nutrients. Large intestine's main job is to absorb water and eliminate waste. There's lots of bacteria that live in our large intestine, and you may think, oh, that's bad, we don't want bacteria in our body, but these bacteria are actually really helpful to us. We need them. They help us to break down waste that our bodies can't. So let's kind of go in order here. So it's hard to see from this picture. The squiggles of the small intestine, they would end around here. And instead of just flowing into the large intestine, there's actually another sphincter, so another circular muscle that opens at the right time and lets food through. So there's a sphincter valve right in here that is letting food in. And when the food enters the large intestine, it's going to be collected in a pouch called the cecum. Then we have the colon. So the colon is the longest part of the large intestine, and this is where the water and vitamins are absorbed. We separate the colon into 4 different sections, and the names are pretty easy to remember because it kind of follows the path that the intestine takes. So first we have the ascending colon. Think ascending means going up, so we start at the cecum and we're going up. Then we have the transverse colon, so like we're transversing across, so this is the part that goes across. Then we have the descending colon. Think that descending means going downwards, so this is the part that is going downwards. And then last but not least, this little part here is called the sigmoid colon. At the end of the colon, we have our rectum, which is the last part of the large intestine, and this is where waste is stored before it's removed. And then last but not least, we have the anus, which is the opening through which waste is eliminated from the body. Okay, so that was our GI tract. So those were all the organs that the food is actually passing through. We also have something called accessory organs. And these are organs that are not part of the GI tract, meaning that no food is passing through them. However, they do play a vital role in digestion. So without them, we would not be able to digest our food properly. The first one is the salivary glands. So we know that those are right close to our mouth. They're kind of under our tongue there, you can see in the picture. And the main job of the salivary glands is to produce saliva. And this saliva contains enzymes that help dissolve food chemically. So they are playing the role in chemical digestion in the mouth. The next one is the pancreas, which is this yellow part here. And this is a long, flat gland. So it secretes liquids into the duodenum, which was that first part of the small intestine. And the fluids that it's secreting partly are enzymes that help in digestion. And then it also secretes a base liquid to neutralize stomach acid because our stomach's really, really acidic, but our intestines don't like that acidity, so we need to neutralize that liquid that's coming through so that it's safe to pass through our intestines. And then it also secretes hormones that regulate the absorption and storage of glucose. The liver is next. So that is our biggest organ in our body. It's huge. It lays in our abdominal cavity, and its main job is to produce bile. So this is a liquid that breaks down fats into small little globs. And then it also removes and breaks down different toxins that get into our body. So our liver is super important. Now the liver produces the bile, but it doesn't actually store it. It's stored in this tiny little yellow-looking organ here called the gallbladder. So the gallbladder stores the bile that's produced in the liver, and then it secretes it into the duodenum at the right time. So let's kind of go through the diagram in order. We're going to follow this little fishy cracker that this person is eating. So we're starting in the mouth, where we're doing that chemical breakdown, and the salivary glands are producing saliva, so we can chemically break down this little fishy. We're going to go past the epiglottis, down the esophagus, through the sphincter and into the stomach. So again, in the stomach, we've got more chemical and mechanical digestion happening. We'll go through our pyloric sphincter and into the duodenum, that first part of our small intestine. This is where the liver here and the gallbladder and the pancreas are all secreting their fluids in to help us with digestion. That was kind of fast, but we just went through the rest of the small intestine. So we went through the jejunum and the ileum. Now we've gone through another sphincter and we are in that pouch area, that cecum. So we went up the ascending colon, across the transverse colon, down the descending colon, and then across the sigmoid colon, where we collect in the rectum. And now the fishy doesn't look so fishy-like anymore. Probably looks more like this. And then we're coming out the anus. So to finish off, we're going to watch a short video on what this actually looks like in our body.
Messy writing can cost you a lot. Grammarly business. A process called. And with her new teeth, she can take on more solid foods. Digestion starts in the mouth. Teeth grind up the food. Then, special glands under the tongue pump out saliva to help break down and lubricate the food on its 12-hour, 13-foot journey through the gut. It'll pass from the stomach into the coils of the small intestine before finally passing into the large intestine. Waves of contracting muscle keep the food moving, a process called peristalsis. These contractions are so powerful, we can even eat upside down. For the first time, a new camera shows a high-definition view of how food travels through our bodies and into our stomachs. Food enters the stomach through a hole at the top. The stomach is a bag of muscle that churns, squashes, and squeezes food into liquid. At the same time, acids break the food down. The stomach walls protect themselves with a lining of mucus. Without it, the acids could digest parts of the stomach itself, causing stomach ulcers. About an hour later, the stomach squeezes the broken down food out through a tiny hole called the pyloric sphincter. The food enters the small intestine, an 11-foot coil of tube where we absorb most of the nutrients. The interior wall of the small intestine is lined with millions of microscopic projections called villi. These increase the surface area of the gut, making it easier to absorb nutrients. First, the pancreas pumps out a juice that neutralizes stomach acid. Then bile from the liver breaks down the fats into tiny droplets. Smaller droplets are easier for the intestine to absorb. After an hour and a half, the small intestine has absorbed most of the nutrients from the food. It's time for what remains to move on. It enters the large intestine through this, the ileocecal sphincter, a valve that keeps our food from going back where it came from. What's left is a mix of waste food and dead cells from the walls of the gut. The The large intestine's main job is to extract water from it. Lots of bacteria live here too, but it isn't because of an infection. We actually need them. They produce enzymes that break down complex carbohydrates in our food. Carbohydrates we couldn't otherwise digest. Finally, after about 12 hours, we expel what's left of our first meal.
All right. I hope you guys are sufficiently intrigued and probably a little bit disgusted, but that is an inside look of what is happening in our digestive system. So that brings us to the end of this crash course. We are now ready for dissections.